beg you!
Some goodbyes are never meant to be final. In the shadowed halls of the Nocturne Dominion, a human captain and an ancient vampire queen are about to learn that duty, distance, and even the laws of biology mean nothing against a bond neither of them chose. But neither can walk away from. What begins as a routine farewell will unravel into a secret powerful enough to shake two governments, rewrite the rules of two species, and force a captain and a queen to decide what they truly value more: the safe life they planned, or the impossible one waiting for them.
Part 1.
Captain Ryan Torres had exactly 6 hours before his high-priority military transport departed the atmospheric defense zone of the Nocturne Dominion, formally concluding an 8-month attachment that had tested the absolute limits of his professional and personal discipline. He stood in the heavily guarded private corridor outside Queen Seraphina's inner sanctum, a corridor finished in polished black marble and silver traceries, adjusting the cuff of his dress uniform for the 5th time, mentally rehearsing the concise final farewell he intended to deliver. It had to be professional, utterly courteous, and above all final. The massive, meticulously carved obsidian inlaid door slid silently open just as his hand lifted toward the chime. Queen Seraphina stood framed in the aperture, her presence a silent, overwhelming force. She was clad in the full regalia of her station, cascading robes of deep midnight velvet that seemed to draw all available light into their folds, a glittering ancient diamond diadem that added an unnecessary measure of height to her already formidable presence, and the signature nocturne eyes the color of liquid obsidian, held in a rigid neutral mask that broadcast absolute, untouchable control. Her extraordinary pale skin and the subtle, inhuman geometry of her features emphasized the raw power she habitually veiled. Her gaze met his with an expression that defied interpretation, years of ingrained royal composure masking the true state of her heart. "Captain Torres," she addressed him, her voice smooth and devoid of inflection. "I understand you have come to fulfill the necessary departure protocols." "Yes, Your Majesty," Ryan responded, seizing the offered formality like a shield. 8 months as her primary military liaison had hammered home the knowledge that Seraphina always retreated behind rigid protocol when her formidable emotions threatened to surface. "My tour of duty is complete. I was hoping to express my gratitude, for spare me the formalized gratitude," Captain Seraphina cut in, stepping aside to grant him passage into her chambers. Her movements were graceful, economical, lethal. "We are both aware that this goodbye is a carefully constructed performance designed to satisfy protocols that neither of us respects given our history. Enter. Deliver your intended speech, and then you may leave." Ryan stepped across the threshold, entering the private space he knew intimately, a room he had frequented for strategy sessions, diplomatic briefings, and during 3 intense and complicated weeks for considerably more personal reasons. The chamber was a perfect blend of imposing elegance and functional military strategy, adorned with centuries-old nocturne artifacts that silently proclaimed her ancient royal lineage. He had unconsciously cataloged every detail during nights he should have been elsewhere, nights that had abruptly concluded 3 weeks prior when he had forced himself to make the difficult, agonizingly necessary decision to sever the growing connection between them. "I needed to say goodbye properly," Ryan stated, meeting her gaze directly, striving to project sincerity rather than fear. "What unfolded between us was unexpected, profoundly intense, but it was fundamentally impossible given our respective positions. I believe we both recognized that inherent limitation from the outset. Is that the core message you came to deliver?" Seraphina inquired, her posture unwavering. "That our brief, passionate entanglement was a calculated error, now to be filed away and politely forgotten upon your departure." "It was not an error," Ryan corrected firmly, feeling the sting of the implication. "It was merely unsustainable. You are the sovereign queen, bound by the eternal complex needs of your dominion. I am a foreign military officer with a mortal career and an immutable duty rotation. The temporary nature of this posting was always the governing factor." "Of course," Seraphina murmured, her tone laced with cool, devastating sarcasm. A temporary assignment leads to a temporary partnership, culminating in a temporary emotional entanglement that can be cleanly dissolved with a courteous, professional farewell. How profoundly human to attempt to categorize something so volatile into neat, time-delimited boxes. That accusation is unjust, Ryan protested, his voice low. You consented when I ended it. You assured me you understood the logistical and political complications. I delivered many appropriate statements, Captain Serafina replied, moving toward the vast panoramic window that overlooked the shadowy, sprawling capital of her kingdom. I am the queen. Uttering politically appropriate statements, irrespective of their emotional truth, is the most basic requirement of my station. However, since you are now making your exit permanent, perhaps a degree of honesty is finally permissible. I did not understand, Ryan, and I do not now understand how you can simply detach yourself from what we shared as though it were the conclusion of a successful tactical operation. The admission twisted sharply in Ryan's gut. This was precisely the painful confrontation he had desperately hoped to circumvent.
Part 2.
The moment they both had to acknowledge that their bond had surpassed mere physical attraction or temporary convenience. The moment he had to face the truth. He was leaving because staying terrified him and threatened the foundation of his entire established life. Serafina, he said quietly, using her name for the first time in weeks. The familiarity feeling dangerous. I am leaving because to stay is impossible. You comprehend the scope, our positions, the fundamental chasm between our species, the massive political liability. There is no established structure for what we would be attempting. It is infinitely preferable to end it cleanly now while we still possess the choice. Preferable for whom, Serafina countered, still facing the dim city. For your promising military career, for my immediate challenge, political stability, for the convenient lie that beings of power are immune to inconvenient, messy attachments. Preferable for both of us, Ryan insisted, though the words tasted like ash. Serafina, I maintain a genuine concern for your welfare, and that very concern is the precise reason I must leave now before this connection grows into something even more unmanageable than it already is. She finally turned, her dark eyes flashing with complex, rapidly cycling emotion. Her facial composure remained, but her gaze was raw, unguarded. You care about me, she repeated, the word an insult. A past tense sentiment offered as a parting consolation prize. How extraordinarily generous of you, mortal. Present tense, Ryan corrected, meeting her glare. I care about you, present tense. But that emotional reality does not alter the political one. In 6 hours, I board a vehicle that returns me to Earth. You rule an eternal kingdom that requires your unwavering focus. Our responsibilities predate our meeting and will continue long after I am gone. And what if I were to inform you that I reject this rationale? Serafina asked, her voice hardening, carrying the thin, dangerous edge of genuine fury beneath the veneer of royal command. What if I proclaimed that as your queen, I refuse to grant you leave to simply depart? I would reply that you are too intelligent, Serafina, to issue a command. I cannot obey, Ryan returned gently, acknowledging her power, but asserting his own limits. My posting tenure is expired. My duty rotation awaits me on Earth. You cannot command me to violate my mandate, just as I could never order you to abandon your throne. We are bound by pre-existing obligations. Serafina held silent for a long, heavy moment, her eyes shifting rapidly, processing every angle. When she finally spoke, her voice was meticulously controlled, colder than the grave. You are naturally correct, how predictable, how terribly rational. Then I suppose this is the moment where I offer my formalized gratitude for your counsel, acknowledge our brief, unauthorized entanglement with appropriate royal dignity, and permit your departure with professional courtesy intact. Serafina, Ryan began, hearing the profound, aching emptiness beneath her formal delivery. No, she interrupted, raising a silencing hand. You have articulated your decision. You have provided your rationale with admirable clinical logic. I am the queen. I understand the dictates of duty and the necessity of impossible choices. Let us conclude this according to your requirements. Thank you, Captain Tours, For 8 months of exemplary military counsel and 3 weeks of memorable personal connection, I wish you only success in your future assignments." It was a dismissal, formal, cold, and absolute. Ryan recognized that he had been granted the very clean, unambiguous conclusion he had come here to demand. No mess, no lingering emotional demands, no complications. It was professionally perfect. Personally, it felt as though he was being gutted. "I am truly sorry," he said, meaning it with every particle of his being, "for how this concluded, for the impossible timing, for my failure to find a way to make this work despite the desire. Your apology is duly noted," Captain Serafina replied, her tone remaining stiffly formal. "Now you must go. Your transport awaits your presence." Ryan nodded, forced himself to turn toward the door, and made it precisely 3 hesitant steps across the polished stone floor before her voice, now stripped bare of all royal veneer, stopped him entirely. "Ryan, wait." He turned back. Serafina had moved swiftly from the window, and the carefully maintained composure was dramatically fracturing. Her eyes were wide, flooded with a distress that magnified her otherworldly beauty into something desperately vulnerable, and her hands, which commanded legions, were visibly trembling despite her obvious attempts at self-control. "There is something I must tell you," she whispered, her voice raw with a tumultuous emotion he had never once heard from the powerful queen. "Something that changes every single variable concerning your departure, your duty, and the very concept of impossibility you cite as the reason to abandon what we created."
Part 3.
"What is it?" Ryan demanded, his military protocol instantly overridden by an overwhelming surge of pure panicked concern. Serafina met his eyes directly, her features convulsed by a rapid cycle of fierce anger and paralyzing fear. When she finally spoke, her voice carried the dual authority of a sovereign and the sheer desperation of a woman confronting an unimaginable terror alone. "You cannot under any circumstances leave me human," she said, each word delivered with precise, deliberate force despite the tremor in her throat. "I am currently carrying your heir." The world did not just tilt, it fractured into incomprehensible pieces. Ryan's lifetime of military conditioning, which had served him through firefights and high-stakes diplomatic crisis, provided absolutely zero framework for processing the information he had just received. He tried to speak, failed, tried again, and finally forced out actual functioning words. That's biologically impossible. Humans and nocturnes cannot successfully breed. Our core life forces are too divergent. The lore is explicit that any union is destined for sterility or the unstable short life of a monstrous goal. The historical records were very clear on this. Records compiled by mortals who never accessed the archives of the ancient nocturne royal bloodlines. Serafina instantly countered, moving to her desk and activating a holographic display. "We possess a profound rare occult trait, an alchemical stability passed down from the first queens of this dominion. It allows the royal line to successfully integrate the life force of a foreign species like yours, creating a true viable hybrid, not a failed abomination. Most of my people cannot interbreed with humans, but the deepest royal bloodlines possess this adaptation. It is rare, profoundly unpredictable, but absolutely devastatingly possible." She waved a hand and the holographic display shifted to show pristine medical scans, unmistakable diagnostic images of a developing early-stage pregnancy. Genetic markers were starkly highlighted, displaying a successful, unprecedented combination of human vitality and nocturne shadow. "This is real," Ryan breathed, his voice reduced to a sound barely audible as he stared at the objective proof of the impossible. "You are actually pregnant with my heir, our child." "Yes," Serafina confirmed. Her carefully maintained composure now utterly vanished, replaced entirely by a frightening mixture of consuming fury and abject terror. "This was discovered 3 days ago. It has been confirmed by my personal medical attendants, who are, I assure you, currently bordering on hysterical over how to handle this unprecedented medical phenomenon and the resulting political catastrophe. So you must now concede, Captain Tours, that your convenient clean departure timeline has just become profoundly complicated." Ryan could not tear his gaze away from the bright, impossible scans. There was a developing life there, created accidentally, yet undeniably real, flourishing inside a vampire queen from whom he had been actively running away. His clean departure had just been catastrophically transformed into the single messiest, most overwhelming situation of his entire life. Why? Why didn't you inform me immediately? He managed to ask, the words tight in his throat. Because I am the queen, and I spent 3 days agonizingly debating whether to inform you at all, Serafina confessed, her eyes wide and pleading. Whether to simply permit you to leave in blissful ignorance, raise this heir alone, and spare you the unbearable burden of a choice you so clearly wished to avoid. But I have found, to my own detriment, that I lack that degree of selflessness. Ryan, I am consumed by fury that you attempted to leave, paralyzed by terror at the prospect of facing this alone, and completely unwilling to let you simply walk away from what we have created together. I wasn't going to. Ryan started to defend himself, but she cut him off with sharp, dismissive wave. You were scheduled to depart in 6 hours, Serafina stated pointedly. You were delivering speeches about duty and impossibility while actively planning to board a transport that would carry you far beyond the reach of the complications you helped engineer. Well, the complication has now escalated into a political catastrophe. Duty has been utterly obliterated by biology. An impossibility is currently gestating within my body in a manner that renders your departure entirely unthinkable. No, Ryan Torres, you do not get to walk away with your sterile speeches about beneficial endings. Not from this. Not from me. Not from our heir. She stood before him trembling, a figure of tremendous, dangerous power, yet vulnerable in a way he had never once witnessed. Ryan's meticulously constructed rationale for leaving simply collapsed into dust. He had sincerely believed he was executing the mature, responsible choice by seeking a clean break. Instead, he realized he had been running from a terrifying truth.
Part 4.
And now there was nowhere left to hide. Ryan stumbled backward into a nearby chair Serafina kept by her desk, his legs suddenly unable to support his weight. His mind frantically processed the impossible data, the biological union that defied all known records, the timing of the conception which perfectly matched their final encounter 3 weeks ago, the implications that utterly shattered his previous understanding of their entire situation. Say something, Serafina demanded, her eyes focusing sharply on him, barely managing to contain her simmering fury. You are staring at living medical scans as if they represent a purely theoretical mathematical problem requiring a detached solution. This is not theory, Ryan. This is reality. It is growing within me, part you, part me, and it is absolutely unprecedented. I am attempting to process. Ryan managed, the words thick with shock. 5 minutes ago, I was saying a final goodbye. Now you are informing me you are pregnant with a hybrid hair that should be biologically impossible. That, Serafina, is a significant information update. An information update, Serafina repeated, her voice dripping with ice. How profoundly clinical. How characteristic of you to treat this as raw data requiring dispassionate assessment rather than a living reality demanding an immediate comprehensive response. That is an unfair judgment, Ryan protested, finally raising his eyes from the scans to meet hers. I am in shock. I am terrified. And I am attempting to rapidly assimilate the existential meaning of this revelation. That is not clinical detachment. That is the normal human response to discovering I am to be a father to a human vampire hybrid who shouldn't exist in the known universe. And does this information update alter your stated departure plans? Serafina asked, her voice snapping with urgency. Or will you still board your transport in? She glanced toward the time display in the corner. 5 hours and 43 minutes, leaving me to face the political and medical fallout alone. I don't know, Ryan confessed, the brutal honesty escaping before he could temper it. Serafina, 6 minutes ago, my life trajectory was clearly defined. Return to Earth, resume my career, and eventually forget about 3 weeks that meant more than they ever should have. Now I am staring at genetic proof of a child I helped create with a powerful vampire queen. And you are demanding a life-altering decision based on information I am still failing to process. Your life has already been altered. Serafina countered. The crucial decision was made by biology, not by our choice. The only remaining question is whether you will face those changes with me as a partner or choose to abandon them entirely. I would never abandon, Ryan began. But Serafina silenced him with an emphatic, forceful gesture. Then what term, she challenged, her voice rising, would you use for boarding a transport while I am pregnant with your heir? What precise language would you employ for leaving this complexity behind while pursuing a convenient future that conveniently omits the reality of what we have created? I call it not knowing what in God's name to do, Ryan roared, rising abruptly to his feet. I call it being completely fundamentally unprepared for a situation that I was scientifically assured was impossible. I call it trying to rapidly calculate how to be responsible to my duty to you and to an heir whose existence I only confirmed 5 minutes ago. That is not abandonment. That is the desperate struggle to process impossible circumstances with insufficient information and no existing framework for an appropriate response. They stood rigidly across the desk from each other, both breathing heavily, the clash of their fury and profound fear, creating a volatile electric atmosphere in the chamber. Serafina's eyes were rapidly shifting between states, no longer fully under conscious control, and Ryan could clearly see the tremor in her hands despite her deep-seated attempts at composure. I am terrified, Serafina admitted suddenly, her voice dropping from its fiery intensity to something quiet, raw, and rarely exposed. I rule a dominion. I command legions. I negotiate treaties that define the very shadows of this sector. Yet, these simple medical scans showing a hybrid heir growing within me terrify me in a way no pitched battle ever could. This is unprecedented, Ryan. My specialized attendants possess no understanding of what to anticipate, how the development will progress, what occult complications might arise from this mixing of bloodlines. And I am expected to confront this while simultaneously maintaining my imperial authority, managing the political firestorm, and potentially doing so entirely alone if you depart. Ryan felt his residual anger instantly dissipate, replaced by a devastating wave of protective concern. What are the exact medical risks?
Part 5.
What did your physician say regarding the hair's viability? They said they do not possess the knowledge, Serafina replied, moving to sink down into her desk chair with a visible exhaustion that suggested she had been shouldering this immense burden for days. A human nocturne hybrid has never successfully been documented in our history. My royal genetics permitted the initial conception, but the subsequent development is an absolute mystery. They offer cautious optimism based on the initial scans, but they stress that severe complications are highly likely. I may require specific occult or medical intervention that is simply unavailable here in the Dominion. The hair may possess needs that neither of our species can comprehend. This is, she paused, struggling visibly for the correct words. This is a terror for which I was entirely unprepared to face. Ryan rounded the desk and looked down at the scans with a devastating new understanding. When precisely did you know? 3 days ago, Serafina confirmed, her gaze unwavering. I experienced an anomaly, underwent a thorough medical examination, and received news that irrevocably restructured my understanding of reality. My attendants are brilliant, but utterly frightened. My political advisors are already calculating the disastrous implications, and I have been entirely alone with this knowledge, debating whether the act of telling you was ultimately selfish or desperately necessary. Why did you tell me? Ryan asked, his voice low and vulnerable. If I was leaving anyway, why not simply permit me to go clean and ignorant? Serafina's dark eyes swept forward, focused completely on him. Because despite your meticulously constructed speeches concerning duty and impossibility, I am not a person who will face a challenge of this magnitude alone when the option of partnership is present. Because this hair deserves a father who is aware of their existence, and because she paused, allowing a terrifying vulnerability to flicker across her perfectly controlled features. Because I need you, Ryan, not merely as a military advisor or a temporary lover or convenient support. I need you as an equal partner to face this terrifying, impossible reality we created together. Ryan felt a fundamental, Irreversible shift occurred deep inside him. All of the rational, logical arguments for leaving career, duty, impossibility, and especially fear suddenly seemed hollow and entirely inconsequential compared to the reality standing directly before him. A powerful vampire queen, pregnant with his impossible hair, making a genuine, naked plea for him to stay, not based on protocol, but on desperate, honest necessity. I ended things because I was scared, Ryan admitted, the raw truth finally breaking free. Not because duty strictly demanded it, or because our relationship was inherently impossible. I ended it because I was profoundly falling in love with you, and that terrified me far more deeply than any combat situation I've ever faced. It felt safer to run now before it grew any more complicated than to face the true depth of what I was actually feeling. Seraphina's eyes widened fractionally. "You were falling for me," was Ryan countered in present tense. I'm still falling, still absolutely terrified, and I was still trying to convince myself that leaving was the mature, responsible choice when in reality it was pure cowardice. I genuinely care about you, Seraphina, more than is convenient, more than makes logical sense for our respective positions. That profound feeling was the reason I was leaving, because staying meant having to confront emotions I possessed no framework for managing. And now, Seraphina asked quietly, her previous fury entirely replaced by a desperate, searching hope. Now that biology has irrevocably solidified the impossibility, now I am exponentially more terrified, Ryan admitted honestly. But I am also beginning to realize that raw fear is not an acceptable reason to abandon someone I care about who is facing a reality this overwhelming. So the core question remains, what viable path exists for us? I am a human military officer. You are a vampire queen. Our heir will be a biological anomaly. How do we even begin to make this function? I honestly do not know, Seraphina replied, a genuine admission of uncertainty. But I do know that the effort of attempting it together is significantly less terrifying than the certainty of facing it alone. Ryan, I am not requesting you to sacrifice your career, nor to abandon your duty entirely. I am asking for your willingness to explore if a way forward exists that does not force us to choose solely between responsibility and relationship. Ryan looked down at the medical scans one final time, focusing on the impossible life they had unintentionally initiated, and then back at the creature of shadow, who had become the singular most important element of his existence, defying every logical, political, and biological reason.
Captain Ryan Tours came to Queen Seraphina's chamber seeking a clean, professional goodbye. 6 hours before transport would carry him backward forever, but the farewell he had rehearsed collapsed the moment Seraphina's azure royal composure cracked, revealing 3 weeks of buried heartbreak neither of them was willing to name. Just as Ryan turned to walk away for good, her voice stopped its cold. World that should have been impossible, a truth that two species were never supposed to create. Now, with the holographic scan still growing on her desk and the weight of an unprecedented hybrid here hanging in the air between them, the real question begins not whether this pregnancy can survive the collision of human and nocturne blood, but whether Ryan and Seraphina can survive what it will cost them to keep it. His transport is still waiting, his career, his duty, everything he built his life around is still calling him home. And somewhere beneath the fear and fury is Seraphina's eyes. A far more dangerous question is forming, one that will decide whether this is where the story ends or where it truly begins. Part 6.
That feels like an extraordinarily rapid transition from discovery to an intergovernmental broadcast. We do not possess the luxury of proceeding slowly. Seraphina countered pointedly. Your transport has departed without you, instantly raising difficult questions. My condition will become visually undeniable within weeks. The political consequences are inherent to the situation, whether we choose to acknowledge them now or delay the inevitable. It is strategically sounder to directly confront the complications rather than permitting dangerous speculation to dictate the terms of the narrative. Ryan instantly recognized the fundamental military logic: seize the initiative, control the battlefield, never permit the enemy to dictate the terms of engagement. Except in this case, the battlefield was their shared vulnerable personal lives, and the enemy was the political scandal that threatened to undermine both their positions of power. "What do you genuinely want?" he asked directly, forcing her to temporarily set aside the politics and the consequences. "Forget the Dominion's requirements and your political mandate for a moment. What does Serafina, the woman, actually want from this situation?" Serafina was silent for a prolonged moment, her eyes adjusting to a thoughtful, focused position. "I want an honest partner to confront this unprecedented pregnancy with me. I want a father for our heir who makes the genuine choice to be present and committed. I want a relationship that is fundamentally rooted in the acknowledgement that we love each other rather than merely pretending this is a purely political arrangement. But I also simultaneously want to protect your career, maintain my inherent political authority, and guarantee a stable, secure environment for the completely unprecedented child we are bringing into this existence. These desires are inherently in conflict in deeply complicated ways." "Yeah," Ryan agreed, exhaling heavily. "They absolutely do conflict. My career requires unwavering adherence to orders and military protocol. Being with you necessitates remaining here in a position for which I am no longer officially assigned. Our hair will be a biological anomaly for which neither of our cultures possesses a framework." This is he ran a frustrated hand through his hair. "This is without exaggeration the single messiest situation I have ever been forced to be a part of. Welcome to the realities of royal life." Serafina said dryly, "Where every personal choice carries profound political weight, and clean, simple solutions are purely theoretical concepts rather than practical options for survival." They spent the entirety of the next hour meticulously crafting a joint response, balancing the necessary truth with the absolute mandate of political necessity. Ryan's message would request an extended specialized diplomatic assignment to the Nocturne Dominion, citing emerging and critical alliance needs. Serafina would formally acknowledge their relationship and the pregnancy to her powerful political council. Both transmissions would be issued simultaneously, presenting a unified, unassailable position before the entrenched opposition had a chance to fully organize. This entire process feels less like announcing a pregnancy and more like planning a full-scale military maneuver, Ryan observed as they finalized the precise wording of the diplomatic code. "The distinction, Captain, is largely semantic," Serafina replied, her expression cold and focused. "Both processes demand rigorous strategic thinking, flawless timing, and the acceptance that casualties, political or otherwise, are inevitably suffered despite the most careful planning. You are comparing our deeply personal relationship to organized warfare," Ryan noted. "I am trying to determine if that is a profoundly nocturne perspective or simply profoundly concerning." "It is regrettably both," Serafina conceded. But a small, fleeting smile touched the corner of her lips. "In my world, politics is merely warfare conducted through non-lethal means. We are simply applying the most appropriate necessary tactics to a personal crisis that happens to possess vast political dimensions." They sent the critical messages together, then settled into a fraught silence to await the complicated anticipated responses. Serafina's political council immediately demanded an emergency session. Ryan's commanding officer responded with a mandate for an urgent video conference within the hour. Neither response offered any encouragement, but both were exactly what they had prepared for. "Are you truly prepared for the onslaught that is coming?" Serafina asked, her eyes searching his as they quickly reviewed the most likely points of opposition. "Your military career is highly unlikely to survive this choice. My own political standing will undoubtedly face an unprecedented challenge. We are consciously creating a scandal that both our distinct cultures will scrutinize with brutal, relentless detail." "No," Ryan admitted honestly, staring at the message request. "I am not remotely prepared for any of this. But I am beginning to comprehend that being perfectly prepared was never the actual point. The point is the simple act of choosing what holds the most value and then consciously facing the absolute consequences together."
Part 7.
"And what precisely holds the most value now?" Serafina asked, her voice soft but insistent. Ryan looked down at the medical scans still glowing softly on her desk, at the impossible growing life they had created, and then back at the creature of immense power and shadow who had against all logic become the singular most important focus of his life. This, he said simply, his voice thick with emotion, me, our air, here, everything else, he continued, is a complication we will systematically solve. But that is the fundamental reality that truly matters. Serafina's eyes softened and her expression held an unprecedented level of raw, unshielded emotion. I love you, she said quietly. The declaration an agonizing effort. I have deliberately avoided uttering those words because queens are strictly forbidden from needing anyone, because acknowledging vulnerability is perceived as a fatal weakness in imperial politics, because admitting attachment creates a profound exploitable liability. But I love you, Ryan Tours. It is the past tense fear transformed into the present tense truth. You deserve to know that truth before we descend into this political catastrophe together. Ryan immediately crossed the short distance to her, cuped her face with great gentleness, and kissed her with all the fierce pent-up emotion he had been suppressing for months. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, too, he said the words of commitment, which is the sole reason I am choosing to remain here, despite the absolute demolition of my career prospects. Why I will face your deeply hostile political council and my furious commanding officer and every other objector. Because you are correct. Vulnerability is terrifying and attachment generates complications. Yet none of that matters as much as the simple act of choosing the person you genuinely love. They embraced for a prolonged moment, drawing mutual strength for the difficult battles that lay immediately ahead. Then Serafina was urgently summoned by her political counsel and Ryan was forced to begin the video conference with his demanding commanding officer, and their personal crisis became irrevocably political. The subsequent council session proved brutal. Serafina's senior advisors argued forcefully that acknowledging a human consort and a hybrid heir created an existential succession crisis, massive diplomatic complications, and terminal political vulnerability. They aggressively proposed alternatives ranging from the horrifying ending of the pregnancy to publicly claiming the child was fully nocturned through fabricated occult intervention. Serafina dismissed every single suggestion with a cold absolute imperial authority that left no doubt as to who held the ultimate power. Ryan's conference with his commanding officer was equally agonizing. Military protocol provided no possible legitimate category for. My vampire girlfriend is pregnant with my hair, and I am choosing to stay with her. He avoided an immediate court-martial only by meticulously reframing his refusal as a critical diplomatic necessity that his continued stabilizing presence was essential to preventing a complete and bloody breakdown of the Terran Nocturne alliance. Even with this skillful maneuver, his military career trajectory was permanently destroyed. That session went about as badly as we could have realistically expected, Ryan said afterward, finding Serafina in her private chambers, her face drawn with exhaustion. Worse, Serafina corrected, sinking onto a divan. My counsel is sharply divided between those who believe I am creating a catastrophic and unforgivable precedent and those who believe I am destroying the ancient dignity of the throne. Your military, meanwhile, believes you have gone native and irreparably compromised your professional judgment. We are now officially the most scandalous couple in both our cultures. So everything's proceeding brilliantly, Ryan quipped, attempting a tired joke to break the tension. Spectacularly terribly, Serafina agreed, a slight genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. But we are confronting it together. That I find makes the terrible profoundly more bearable. Is this the actual reality of partnership? Ryan asked, his expression wry. Joint catastrophe management and mutual career destruction. This, Captain, is the reality of love when it collides with the full force of political power, Serafina replied. It is messy, it is profoundly complicated, but it is nonetheless worth every sacrifice. At least, she added, her eyes twinkling, according to the human romantic literature I have been recently forced to study. You've been secretly reading human romance novels? Ryan asked, genuinely surprised. Research, Serafina declared defensively. a rare flicker of embarrassment in her eyes to understand your species' cultural expectations concerning relationships and the necessary expression of complex emotion. It was mandatory that your majesty is officially the most adorably nerdy thing you have ever confessed, Ryan said, closing the distance and pulling her gently to him, a vampire queen utilizing occult analysis to understand the emotional framework of her consort.
Part 8.
And what precisely holds the most value? Now, Serafina asked, her voice soft but insistent. Ryan looked down at the medical scans still glowing softly on her desk, at the impossible growing life they had created, and then back at the creature of immense power and shadow who had against all logic become the singular most important focus of his life. This, he said simply, his voice thick with emotion, me, our air, hair, everything else, he continued, is a complication we will systematically solve. But that is the fundamental reality that truly matters. Serafina's eyes softened and her expression held an unprecedented level of raw, unshielded emotion. I love you, she said quietly. The declaration an agonizing effort. I have deliberately avoided uttering those words because queens are strictly forbidden from needing anyone, because acknowledging vulnerability is perceived as a fatal weakness in imperial politics, because admitting attachment creates a profound exploitable liability. But I love you, Ryan Tours. It is the past tense fear transformed into the present tense truth. You deserve to know that truth before we descend into this political catastrophe together. Ryan immediately crossed the short distance to her, cuped her face with great gentleness, and kissed her with all the fierce pent-up emotion he had been suppressing for months. When they finally separated, both breathing heavily, he rested his forehead against hers. I love you, too, he said the words of commitment, which is the sole reason I am choosing to remain here, despite the absolute demolition of my career prospects. Why I will face your deeply hostile political council and my furious commanding officer and every other objector. Because you are correct. Vulnerability is terrifying and attachment generates complications. Yet none of that matters as much as the simple act of choosing the person you genuinely love. They embraced for a prolonged moment, drawing mutual strength for the difficult battles that lay immediately ahead. Then Serafina was urgently summoned by her political counsel and Ryan was forced to begin the video conference with his demanding commanding officer, and their personal crisis became irrevocably political. The subsequent council session proved brutal. Serafina's senior advisors argued forcefully that acknowledging a human consort and a hybrid heir created an existential succession crisis, massive diplomatic complications, and terminal political vulnerability. They aggressively proposed alternatives ranging from the horrifying ending of the pregnancy to publicly claiming the child was fully nocturned through fabricated occult intervention. Serafina dismissed every single suggestion with a cold absolute imperial authority that left no doubt as to who held the ultimate power. Ryan's conference with his commanding officer was equally agonizing. Military protocol provided no possible legitimate category for. My vampire girlfriend is pregnant with my hair, and I am choosing to stay with her. He avoided an immediate court-martial only by meticulously reframing his refusal as a critical diplomatic necessity that his continued stabilizing presence was essential to preventing a complete and bloody breakdown of the Terran Nocturne alliance. Even with this skillful maneuver, his military career trajectory was permanently destroyed. That session went about as badly as we could have realistically expected, Ryan said afterward, finding Serafina in her private chambers, her face drawn with exhaustion. Worse, Serafina corrected, sinking onto a dian. My counsel is sharply divided between those who believe I am creating a catastrophic and unforgivable precedent and those who believe I am destroying the ancient dignity of the throne. Your military, meanwhile, believes you have gone native and irreparably compromised your professional judgment. We are now officially the most scandalous couple in both our cultures. So everything's proceeding brilliantly, Ryan quipped, attempting a tired joke to break the tension. Spectacularly terribly, Serafina agreed, a slight genuine smile finally reaching her eyes. But we are confronting it together. that I find makes the terrible profoundly more bearable. Is this the actual reality of partnership? Ryan asked, his expression wry. Joint catastrophe management and mutual career destruction. This, Captain, is the reality of love when it collides with the full force of political power, Serafina replied. It is messy, it is profoundly complicated, but it is nonetheless worth every sacrifice. At least, she added, her eyes twinkling, according to the human romantic literature I have been recently forced to study. You've been secretly reading human romance novels? Ryan asked, genuinely surprised. Research, Serafina declared defensively, a rare flicker of embarrassment in her eyes to understand your species' cultural expectations concerning relationships and the necessary expression of complex emotion. It was mandatory. That your majesty is officially the most adorably nerdy thing you have ever confessed, Ryan said, closing the distance and pulling her gently to him, a vampire queen utilizing occult analysis to understand the emotional framework of her consort.
Part 9.
We are significantly past the dating stage, Serafina pointed out with queenly precision. We have progressed directly to the phase of pregnancy and massive political scandal. This, Ryan, is advanced relationship territory, a fair assessment, Ryan conceded. So where is the next battleground? We have survived the initial political reaction. What is the next phase? The next phase, Serafina said, resting her hand protectively over her abdomen, is figuring out practically how to make this work. How to seamlessly blend our lives despite the fundamental cultural chasm. How to prepare ourselves to raise an heir for whom neither of our species has any existing experience. How to construct a sustainable partnership that successfully fulfills both our deepest personal needs and the rigid, immutable political requirements. These, my love, are what I would term somewhat significant challenges. Somewhat, Ryan agreed, wrapping his arms securely around her. But I have come to believe that impossible is merely another word for has not been accomplished yet. We have already achieved a biologically impossible hybrid pregnancy. Confronting the political impossibility now seems manageable in comparison. Your stubborn mortal optimism is either profoundly refreshing or utterly delusional, Serafina observed. Likely both, Ryan admitted, his chin resting against her soft velvet robes. But I am fully committed now. My human career is already functionally destroyed, and our collective reputations are already questioned globally. We might as well go Allen on making this unprecedented life function. Serafina's eyes were full of a powerful mixture of gratitude and formidable determination. Then we proceed together. We confront every complication as equal partners, and we consciously build something entirely unprecedented because conventional approaches simply do not possess a framework for us. This will be intensely difficult. Everything genuinely worth doing usually is, Ryan replied. They stood together in the Queen's chambers, two individuals drawn from fundamentally separate universes who had inadvertently created a shared impossible reality and made the definitive choice to face its overwhelming consequences together. The political battles would continue indefinitely. The profound cultural complications would constantly emerge, and raising a hybrid heir would present emotional and logistical challenges neither could possibly anticipate. But looking at Serafina powerful, fiercely vulnerable, and finally completely his, Ryan knew that he had made the only choice possible. Some loves, some truths were simply worth the destruction of all established rules. 6 months later, Ryan stood within the heavily specialized medical wing of the Black Citadel, watching real-time holographic scans of their daughter moving with graceful, silent power inside Serafina's abdomen. He still found it difficult to grasp that this was his actual life. He was now a former military captain, a current diplomatic consort, and soon to be father to a human vampire hybrid who had already managed to cause unprecedented political upheaval across 2 governments before ever taking her first breath. She is profoundly active today, Your Majesty, the head physician noted carefully, highlighting the vigorous movement patterns on the scan. She is strong, undeniably healthy, and developing substantially ahead of the projected timeline. The occult stability effect of the royal bloodline is truly remarkable, defying all historical precedent. Serafina lay upon the examination table, her hand gripping Ryan's tightly as they both watched their daughter. Her pregnancy was now visually undeniable, impossible to hide, and had been enshrined as an official, high-level diplomatic matter acknowledged by both the Terran and Nocturne governments with vastly differing degrees of enthusiasm. "When you first told me I couldn't leave because you were pregnant," Ryan said quietly, his gaze fixed on the scan, "I do not believe either of us could have truly imagined that this would actually work out. I was consumed by both fury and terror," Serafina admitted candidly. "Announcing the pregnancy as a means to halt your immediate departure was a desperate, almost suicidal political maneuver with an extraordinarily low probability of success. The fact that you stayed, that we persevered and managed to make this function despite all external opposition, this has far exceeded even my most optimistic political projections. Our entire relationship, I believe, is fundamentally based on exceeded projections and the attainment of impossible outcomes," Ryan observed, smiling slightly. "It seems entirely appropriate." The preceding 6 months had been intensely complicated in ways neither had foreseen. Ryan's established military career had been officially terminated, although he had been immediately granted a diplomatic posting as a cultural liaison, a transparent necessary cover for the human consort of the Queen. Serafina's political standing had been aggressively challenged multiple times, requiring her to strategically reposition the concept that a human consort and a hybrid heir were not weaknesses, but powerful stabilizing diplomatic assets. Their relationship had matured and deepened through their shared continuous challenges.
Part 10.
Meticulously navigating each other's ancient cultures, negotiating the combined living arrangements within the Black Citadel, and preparing for an heir that required the dedicated understanding of both human medical science and specialized nocturne professionals. It had been messy, intensely difficult, and yet absolutely worth every single complication. 3 more weeks, the physician stated, reviewing the final comprehensive scans, and then we will have the honor of meeting this unprecedented little one. After the detailed appointment, they walked slowly through the ancient shadowed palace gardens that had quietly become their sacred refuge. Serafina moved with a natural slowness now, one hand resting protectively upon her swollen abdomen, though she fiercely refused any suggestion to officially reduce her arduous duties. "Are you truly scared?" Ryan asked gently, referring to the imminent birth and the unknown challenges that would immediately follow. "Terrified," Serafina admitted without hesitation. "But I am significantly less terrified than I was 6 months ago. Then I faced the absolute prospect of confronting everything alone. Now I face it all with you as my partner." That, Ryan confirmed, pulling her close, was the single best decision I have ever made. Staying here when you demanded it, consciously choosing this impossible reality over the safe, secure career I had planned, you forced me to fight for us, Ryan, Serafina replied, her voice filled with tenderness. "I am the queen. I am strictly accustomed to people instantly complying with my commands. But you required genuine persuasion, an honest choice, and a true partnership rather than simple obligation. That demand, ironically, made us fundamentally stronger." They reached their favorite shadowed vantage point, overlooking the sprawling ancient city, watching the 3 nocturne moons set against a sky painted in colors Earth had never produced. In 3 short weeks, their daughter would be born, a completely new life in the Dominion, a literal shadow bridge between 2 opposed species. She would be living proof that impossible merely meant no one had yet possessed the courage to try. "What exactly do we tell her?" Ryan asked, his eyes still fixed on the horizon. "When she is finally old enough to comprehend the story of how we met and how she came into existence." "The complete truth," Serafina said, her gaze steady. "That her father attempted to leave, that her mother, in an act of profound desperation, refused to permit it, and that our initial terror and desperation ultimately created the genuine honesty we had been meticulously avoiding. That love in the face of absolute power is often messy, complicated, and fundamentally requires the courage to admit you need someone, even when the act of vulnerability feels like a dangerous weakness." That, Ryan observed, smiling softly, is quite a complicated origin story. She will be an equally complicated person, Serafina replied, her eyes twinkling. She will inherit your unique human stubbornness, my ingrained nocturne pride, and a set of unprecedented occult genetics. She deserves a complicated truth rather than a simplified, convenient fairy tale. Ryan pulled Serafina close, his embrace meticulously careful of her pregnancy. I love you, he whispered, still present tense, still growing stronger despite, or perhaps precisely because of every single complication we have faced. And I love you as well, Serafina responded, her eyes soft with complete deep contentment. Thank you for staying when I demanded it, and for consciously building this incredible, impossible life with me. Their daughter kicked strongly within Serafina's body, and Ryan felt the distinct movement clearly, causing them both to laugh softly. 3 weeks until everything would fundamentally change again. 3 weeks until their family became a solid, tangible reality that transcended all political complications and cultural differences. Are you ready? Serafina asked, her voice low. Absolutely not, Ryan admitted honestly. But I am fully ready to try anyway with you, and that I have learned is entirely enough. They stood together, two powerful beings, watching the alien moons set over an ancient kingdom that had against all odds become their shared messy home, preparing together for a future that should have been utterly impossible but was rapidly becoming a beautifully, complicatedly real existence. One impossible choice at a time.
Impossible was never a wall for Rian and Serafina. It was only ever a starting point. A rushed goodbye became a confession, a forbidden pregnancy became a diplomatic reckoning, a queen who was never allowed to need anyone found the one person worth breaking every rule for, and a soldier who believed love was a liability discovered it was the only thing worth fighting a war for. Their daughter will be born into a world that still doesn't know what to make of her, but she will also be born into proof that two impossible people from two impossible worlds choose each other anyway. Some stories end with impossible, theirs began there, and that in the end made all the difference.